Well, it's that time of year again. We are into August, and if you have a Bermudagrass lawn, you need to either be preparing for or deciding if you are going to overseed with ryegrass. If that's the case for you, well, you're in luck. This video is going to cover everything you need to know to have a successful ryegrass overseed and how to deal with it in the spring. We're going to be breaking this down into three components. First up is seed selection. Next is going to be the actual preparation of the lawn here, as well as application of the seed. And then third is how we're going to deal with it in the springtime. And then we're going to wrap everything up with a pros and cons to help you make the most informed decision possible on if you want to overseed your lawn to give it some year-round green. First up, we have our seed selection. Now there's two varieties you can choose from. There's perennial ryegrass and annual ryegrass. Perennial ryegrass is the more desirable of the two, and one of the most popular brands or mixes for an overseed is Champion GQ. The second is your annual ryegrasses. Now I'm splitting this up into two. There's your traditional kind of like co-op annual ryegrass that is used solely as erosion control. And then there is a more, I guess, enhanced or an elite annual ryegrass. And that's the SOS Max by Behrenberg. And if you all remember, I did use that 2 years ago. And if you want to know all about that and my impressions on that, there's a link in the description to my final thoughts of using SOS Max. Now for a price comparison, because it is 2021 and things are a little crazy, prices have increased some depending on where you are sourcing your seed from. Now I've purchased the SOS Max from JOHNSTON Seed, no affiliation with them whatsoever. So we're going to use JOHNSTON as a prime example for this video. A 50-pound bag of Champion GQ is going to run you right now $108.99 plus any applicable taxes and shipping. Shipping will vary based on where you live. Now let's look at the SOS Max. That's coming in at $79.35 plus any taxes and shipping. So you're going to have around $28 difference between the Champion GQ and the SOS Max. If you're looking for that deep, dark green, awesome sissy grass appearance that you're familiar with Rye and Nor, you will want to go with the Champion GQ or a perennial variety. An annual variety, even the improved annual like the SOS Max, will be a more limey green. That's just the way annuals work. So if color is the name of the game and that's what you're shooting for, you're going to want to stick with the perennial ryegrasses. But whatever seed you use, I was very happy with both the perennial blend that I used and the SOS Max. Big thing you need to look out for though is on the label. There are three things you need to pay attention to. That is your other crop, your weed content, and your noxious weeds. You want your other crop and weed content to be zero or as close to freaking zero as possible. And the same goes for noxious weeds. You want that at zero. Do not purchase anything that has a noxious weed count, because that's just going to get you some really nasty crap that's in the seed. So with the seed purchased, hopefully resting nice in a cool, dry place in your garage, you can then get on to the preparation. Now, depending on where you live, this will vary. Again, like I say, you need to learn your lawn and, more importantly, learn your climate to get a kind of understanding for things. Here in East Tennessee, I usually apply between Labor Day and the 15th of September. I can get away with going all the way into the end of September though, because perennial ryegrass does germinate very quickly. The SOS Max actually germinated better when the daytime temperatures were around 40 degrees. So start planning on when your temperatures are going to be in the optimal range, but you're going to be probably mid-September. So preparing the grass, you can get away without scalping it. However, performing a scalp will allow that seed to get down below the turf's canopy, get better seed to soil contact. And how to scalp a lawn, I've done tons of videos. There's a link for how to properly scalp a lawn. That's more dealing with the spring scalp, but a mid-season reset type scalp will work just as well. But before you scalp the lawn, you may want to look into putting down a growth regulator a few days before, something like T-Nex. And why is that? Well, you want to give that ryegrass time to germinate and get some growth on it before the Bermuda just grows right back up over it, because even though we're in mid-September seeding, we can still get temperatures into the 90s, upper 90s, and that's prime Bermuda growing temperatures. For applying the seed itself, if you have a larger yard, holy cow, you can get away with a broadcast spreader. Just get it dialed in. It can be a Scott's, it can be a Let's Go, a Spiker, whatever you have, even an Anderson's if you bought one of those. Very nice spreaders, just very, very expensive. Or you can also use a drop spreader. That's what I prefer to use, and I have a little rinky-dinky Scott's drop spreader. It gets the job done. Now I like the drop spreader because it's not slinging seed, so I don't have to worry as much about grass seed getting into undesirable areas, such as behind me along the fence with all my nasty looking flowers, or in any other landscape beds to where I then have to either pull or chemically remove that grass. Even a little whiz. You can take the whiz on the lawn as well, and that will get the seed out. Speaking of the seed, how much are you going to be putting down? Well, for an overseed of Bermudagrass, it's calling between 10 and 15 pounds of seed. So on the low rate for my 5,000 square feet, I'm looking at a 50-pound bag. You all can do the math and figure out what you need for your lawn, and that's how much you need to order. And I also would probably recommend ordering just a little bit extra in case you have some thin areas. You can use the whiz to pop some down along there and get everything filling in good and even. Once your seed's down, just water it like you would any overseed if you're used to overseeding tall fescue, because if you have a tall fescue lawn or had one in the past, I know you're used to overseeding that. But you want to lightly water it a few times a day to keep the seed moist until it germinates. Then after it's germinated, after a few days, you can slowly back the water frequency off and increase your water durations. But remember, you don't want to flood the lawn, drown the seed out, causing it to wash away. One thing I haven't mentioned yet though is fertilizer. What kind of fertilizer you want to use? Well, personally, myself, I would not recommend putting down fertilizer when you seed or even a couple of weeks after. Yes, it will help the grass grow, but it's also going to help the Bermuda grow as well, and you kind of want to keep the Bermuda is not growing as much as possible, and that's extremely difficult to do. If you put down fertilizer, will it ruin anything? No, you just may notice the Bermuda kind of overtaking the ryegrass, and you don't want that to happen too soon because mowing it can cause some issues. Back when I did my perennial ryegrass overseed was also the same time I took ownership of that Toro Flex, and it had a groomer on it at that same time. The groomer on the Flex 21 runs all the time, at least it does with my model. There is not a disengage option. There is a height setting that disengages it, but all that's doing is actually just raising the groomer up. It was still spinning, and I had an issue to where it ripped out a ton of my perennial ryegrass I overseeded with. So when you go to start mowing it after a couple weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, start with a manual reel if you can. But if your greens mower has a groomer on it, make sure you can turn it off. If you can't turn it off, I would suggest just waiting a little bit longer, mowing with a rotary, or hopping onto Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, wherever, or a neighbor to see if you can borrow or purchase a manual reel for cheap. Those are a whole lot lighter than a greens mower and will do less damage, and you'll get better results. And that's evidence of my stripe off video that I did with Ryan Knorr, which was the same year my groomer ripped out my perennial ryegrass. We all know how that turned out. I beat the snot out of him. Oh, and another quick thing, just because we have to wait a few weeks and that ryegrass will be very tall, don't worry about the 1/3 rule. You can break it and cut it down. The grass will be just fine. Now we have the absolute most important bit about overseeding, and this applies with perennial ryegrasses or annual ryegrasses, and that is your springtime transition plan. How are you going to go from your ryegrass back into Bermudagrass when that wakes up after its long winter nap? And that is, you're going to spray it out. It's that simple. Anyone that tells you that the heat will kill it, especially if you're in the southeast transition zone and some old man or crazy says, hey, the heat'll kill it, I'll tell you right now, it's not going to kill it. You need to spray it out. You can do it in a cost-effective manner that will take a few applications using a product like MSM Turf. It's relatively inexpensive. It takes minuscule amounts to use. You just need to make sure it's not windy at all and you are familiar with spraying, or you can destroy trees. My personal favorite though is Monument. Yes, it is pricey as anything. It is super freaking expensive, but it's also super freaking effective. And that's what I go to when I need to spray out any ryegrass, fescue, or hell, even some KBG if I get bored with this Bermuda experiment, which may happen one day. So you have your herbicides, and don't be afraid. If you're not comfortable spraying those, you can always call in some help. I did it with the MSM, and it worked absolutely wonderful. Did such a great job. Missed the guy. I need to get back in touch with him pretty soon though. Now on to the pros and cons. This will be actually pretty short. Pros, you're gonna have a freaking sweet green lawn all winter long. Most of us aren't running a sports facility where we need it for, erosion control or playability issues. We're just doing it 100% solely for the experience and to live a few months out of the year with the ability to stripe our grass insanely well and win Lawn of the Month twice. Isn't that right, Thor? Now onto the cons though. Well, it's green all year long, and if you want a break from mowing and you have a mild winter, you may not get that, and so you may be mowing all winter long. I've done that before. It was a lot of fun until it wasn't. Another con is the spring transition, and that is the fact that you have to spray it out, and doing that will negatively impact your Bermuda coming out of dormancy. Spraying it out, however, will hurt it less than if you just let the grass die by the heat, which it won't. So knowing that your spring transition will be a little bit more difficult than if you've done nothing is something to keep in mind, and if you want to do it. Personally, myself, I feel that the payoff of that awesome year-round green makes up for any springtime green up troubleshooting issues or transition issues. You just have to weigh what's more important to you, the year-round green or transitioning from brown to green as easily as possible. We have one more con, and this is kind of specific to where we are right now. I showed the prices earlier for the Champion GQ and the SOS Max, and while not terribly expensive from JOHNSTON seed, they were falling in line. If you go with other places, there are some seed shortages this year across all varieties of grass, and that can actually increase the cost quite dramatically. Some sites, I believe Hancock was selling a 25-pound bag of Champion GQ for $96. So shop around when you're going to look. I'll have links for JOHNSTON below. Again, no affiliation whatsoever. I've purchased from them before in the past. I've had fantastic result with the seed purchased from them and great customer service. So I will direct you to where I bought mine from. You can also go locally. My perennial ryegrass I bought a couple years ago, I picked up locally from Dickens Turf and Landscape, based out of Nashville, but they have a location here in Knoxville. Great seed there with your local turf and landscape supply stores. Just be sure to read the label when you go look at the bags to make sure there's no noxious weeds, other crops, and weed seeds are as low as possible. So there it is. That's all you need to know about perennial ryegrass overseeding of your Bermuda. Some people call it, their winter rye. Whatever you want to call it though, it can get you some fantastic results if you properly prepare your site, get the seed applied properly, but at the right rates between 10 and 15 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Water it properly and let it go. It'll be a great year-round play area for your kids. If you don't like the gray winters, it gives you a little cheery pick-me-up with the green, and everyone will be in awe until it comes to transition time and it looks like dumpster fire for a couple weeks. But that's okay. It'll be back shortly in that full Bermuda alpha grass power. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. It's Mike, Real Low Dad. Let me know down below if you have any more questions, and we'll see you again pretty freaking soon.